Here we are with lesson number 7 for Gaming Ergonomics 101, and in this episode we're going to go over all of the updated evidence and research so you can make the best decision for your ergonomics with a gaming chair. So we're going to talk about backrest, chair height, chair seat and angle, armrest, and then go over a step-by-step guide to help you make a better decision about your chair in your environment. So making sure it'll fit to your desk and just fit to your body type and body shape. So let's get to it. So before we begin, I want to make an important caveat and just zoom out a little bit so you guys can understand the bigger picture when it comes to ergonomics, in that a chair and ergonomics and posture in general is just one part of that larger approach and larger picture to gaming health. We have to worry about our conditioning, our lifestyle, and our habits, along with some other factors to really optimize everything about being a better and more healthy gamer. And hey, fortunately, you are subscribed to 1HP so you can start your journey for better health. Another part of this caveat is to realize that coming up with a guide for ergonomics of a gaming chair is not easy. It has to consider not only the differences of body type, our shapes, our morphology, but also whether you or any individual is in pain or not. And I wanted to create this guide that could help as many individuals as possible. And this is the overall result. So the recommendations in this lesson are going to provide ideal biomechanical ranges you should aim to achieve, but also be considerate of your individual measurements, your sitting preferences, and just whether or not you have pain. So there's a few concepts we need to understand before we can get into the actual recommendations and looking into the actual evidence for each component of chair ergonomics. And all of these considerations are important to us. First, we need to understand a lumbopelvic position and muscular activity. So there are two major sitting styles that we see when we work with gamers or for anyone that sits in front of a PC for an extended period of time. And that is the flexion or extension-based sitting style. So the flexion-based sitting style is the common sitting position that we see most gamers and programmers assume, and that is that rounded low back, rounded pelvis, slouched position. And now on the flip side, we have the extension based posture where the lower back is arched, the pelvis is tilted and rounded forward. Imagine water spilling out in front of the bucket of the pelvis. Both of those create different adaptive changes in the muscles surrounding the front and back side of the hip and low back, leading to some tightness, weakness, some inhibition, and that can eventually lead to some hip and low back issues. Again, if you're assuming those for an extended period of time. And we want to establish the understanding of these sitting styles now because we're going to reference them later during the individual sections. So it's impossible to talk about chair adjustability without considering the actual position we aim to be in, right? So how does the chair fit into the picture of health? Before we dig into each section and the science-based ergonomic recommendations, there's an important thing the 1HP team wants to stress. Any chair is only so important. After a certain point of support and adjustability, there's not much more improvement you'll see from getting a more ergonomic chair. A chair and how you sit, good posture, are part of what goes into preventing injury and optimizing your performance. Gaming and work habits, like how often you stand up and move, how often you change positions, and how often you rest and take maybe some stretch breaks, those are all important factors as to how you can make sure you can play more and hurt less. So recent studies have actually shown that there may be an impact of the length of time that we sit and a lower back pain. Not surprisingly, right? We've mentioned this in other pieces of content that there's no such thing as bad posture, and there's no one posture that's inherently more harmful than other postures. It's the amount of time that we spend in it and the overall amount of physical inactivity. How much are you not moving? That's what really leads to the negative or harmful adaptations. Additionally, some studies have shown that small postural shifts and movements while we're sitting can reduce the likelihood of lower back pain. Again, your best posture is your next posture. You can continually move, and that can help you minimize the risk of harmful adaptive changes leading to pain. So again, past a certain point of support and adjustability, there's not anything substantially or significantly better that one chair is going to offer you over the other. And even if you have the best chair, it is not going to make up for poor posture, weakness, poor trunk endurance, poor habits. The lesson here is shift frequently during a downtime, take stretch breaks, and just move more. And now let's just get into each section so you can learn the research. Let's start by talking about the backrest along with the lumbar and cervical support. What we typically recommend at 1HP is setting your backrest between 90 to 120 degrees, and only if necessary using a lumbar or cervical pillow that naturally conforms to the shape of your neck and lower back. To set it up, start at 90 degrees, then gradually move back to an angle that you feel most comfortable based on your size. Our goal with any backrest is to ensure that we assume a neutral position for our lower back. And this is the natural curvature that our spine assumes, and it provides the least amount of stress on the supporting tissues. Here's some research that explores a little more about backrest. So in this 2020 study, they looked at how backrest height in 4 different positions, from forward lean to upright to mid reclined to fully reclined, how that influenced muscular activity in our back and our neck. So this study was pretty small, 8 males, 8 females, not a lot of different body types to consider, so we can't take away too much, but they did show that with taller backrest heights, there was increased activation of the lower back muscles with less activation of the neck muscles. And the authors believe that this was in part due to the taller backrest contacting the individuals at a certain point, increasing the activity of the lower back. So basically, this study tells us that it's really important where the backrest, the lumbar and cervical support contact us to be able to minimize overall muscular activity. And that's why for us, we want to make sure the lumbar support meets the small of your back, as well as the cervical support really naturally conforms to your neck curvature. This study also somewhat puts to rest the idea that the reclined position is not necessarily better than the upright, but we do have to discuss the idea of disc pressure, which a lot of people reference, and that is not the cause of low back pain. Okay, I'll say it again. Disc pressure is not the cause of low back pain. And a lot of the previously written content and videos out there that still pervade the internet seem to be based on this single gold standard study by Wilk et al. In 1999, which reported that intradiscal pressure is the lowest in that slightly reclined position. The differences in intradiscal pressure don't provide us the complete picture about the stresses of the tissues surrounding the spine, and this study led to the idea that reclined is better than upright, but I believe it misses the point and is a misinformed recommendation. Many studies have actually shown that the disc is not often the cause of low back pain, and a more specific study showed it's unlikely that the raised intradiscal pressure is any cause of back pain in general. So again, what's more important to us is the amount of muscular activity surrounding the spine, and we want to minimize that activity to reduce the amount of stress on the tissues, joints supporting our spine. And this can be achieved through more neutral positioning, what we talked about earlier. And what we recommend is finding our neutral spine first to relax our lower back musculature, and then adjust the reclining angle of the chair. And that's why I make the suggestion above to start at 90 degrees, then move it towards 120 as you see fit. And again, zooming out, always thinking about the bigger picture in that, hey, there might be subtle differences in muscular activity, but if you take breaks, get up, move regularly, these subtle differences don't matter as much. So we definitely have to answer the question of whether lumbar and neck supports are needed. And most of the time, for me, it is no, as most of the lumbar and neck supports on the market push you into excessively forward head position or excessively arched or anteriorly tilted position of that lower back and pelvis that can often lead to more pain. There have been some studies that have shown that lower back supports provide no reduction in lower back pain for the general population, while other studies have shown contradicting results, showing that the inbuilt lumbar support can alleviate some pain. So again, what gives? What has created this difference in results for these studies? I believe it is a factor of the contact position on that specific population that's being tested. Again, how much is it pushing you into that neutral position, or is it pushing you out of it, requiring you to overutilize some of the muscles of your lower back? So for me, the recommendation here is that if you're going to be using a lumbar or neck pillow, it doesn't push you into any excessive position of forward head or anterior pelvic tilt, but it helps you maintain that neutral position a little more easily, as that helps us maintain or minimize the overall amount of stress on our lower back and neck. For chair height, what we typically recommend is that your hips and your knees, they stay parallel to the ground, and to make sure that your feet stay supported, whether it be with a footrest or directly on the ground. Setting your chair up for your thigh to be parallel to the ground makes it so that there isn't an excessive amount of pressure underneath the thigh that might prevent blood flow. And when they're not at the same level, sometimes it can lead to positions of the lower back and pelvis to be a little more rounded. So when the knees are elevated, because of that position, the lower back and pelvis rounds backwards, and it is that posterior pelvic tilt that a lot of people reference. And on the flip side, if the hips are a little too high, and this is typically seen when the chair height is a little higher, then there is too much pressure underneath the thigh, and that prevents blood from returning back to the heart. Okay, so what about the chair seat, the depth, and the angle? What we typically recommend is that the chair starts at a parallel angle, parallel to the ground, and the depth of the chair doesn't create excessive pressure on the back side of the knee. So we want you to start there and then alter the tilt based on your sitting tendencies. And I'll describe what I mean by your sitting tendencies right now. There are two major ways that we see gamers sit. One is in a position of flexion or being completely rounded, and the other is in a position of extension where the lower back is arched, the pelvis is tilted forward. So flexion, rounded, posterior pelvic tilt, extension, arched, and anterior pelvic tilt. And depending on the shape, the size, the morphology of the individual, there's always going to be a range of differences for how someone is built. And ultimately, it always comes back to the position of the lower back and pelvis. The angle of the seat has direct effects on that position, and that can have consequences in biomechanical stress if the individual maintains that position for an extended period of time. And so when the chair seat is tilted forward, it creates an extension position. Lower back becomes arched, the pelvis is anteriorly tilted. That can sometimes lead to excessive stress on sliding joints on the side of the spine. Again, if it's held for an extended period of time and you don't stay physically active. And on the flip side, if the chair seat is tilted backwards, you're going to create that flexion-based position. That pelvis is going to tilt backwards into a posterior pelvic tilt, and that can put tensile stress on those same joints, as well as putting extra stress on some of the muscles on the back side of your spine. Hopefully you guys can see the trend now. We don't want to be in the extreme ranges of motion, too flexed, too extended, based on our chair tilt. And ideally our goal is to be in the neutral position. But there have been some studies that have shown that certain individuals might benefit from the tilt. So a study showed that when a seat was inclined, it made those that sat in a position of extension worse. It made them experience a little more pain because, as you guys remember, when we're tilting forward, if we're already in extension, it's going to put us into more extension. And that can again lead to excessive stress on some sliding joints of the spine. And in the same study, it showed that those that sat in a more rounded position, flexed, posteriorly pelvic tilted, that allowed them to feel better. So ultimately what we want to do with the chair tilt position is to push you towards a position of neutral, depending on your sitting preference. If you sit in a flex preference, maybe the chair tilt forward will help you sit in a more neutral position. And on the flip side, if you're sitting too extended, maybe a slight reclining of the chair seat will be beneficial for you. But ultimately, the bigger picture is we have to zoom out. Stay active, keep moving, and it doesn't matter what you end up doing with your chair seat angle. So talking now about the depth of the chair, or how far it is from back to front, it's important that our thighs clear the edge, and that again prevents excessive pressure on the backside of the knee. Again, we want to help and facilitate blood flow returning from the veins of our legs all the way back to the heart. Sometimes blood can pool, and that can lead to us feeling a little fatigued. So we want to make sure that we give that space between the back of the knee and the chair, or the front of the chair. And the waterfall edges for some chairs are beneficial to allow for this. One other thing to note is that when chairs are typically too long or there's too much depth, it can put us in that posteriorly pelvic tilted position. And so what about armrests and, of course, the seat cushion itself? What we typically recommend with armrests, if you're going to be using it or if you're using your desk, is that it puts us in a position where our shoulders are relaxed. So not too high. If it's too high here, it's going to elevate your shoulders, cause some issues here. If it's too low, you're going to round your back and our shoulders become depressed or sad. Additionally, there are some preferences to consider. Sometimes the armrest height, it matches the height of the desk, and it might prevent you from scooting in towards the actual desk itself. And because there's different depths in your desk size, you want to always be mindful of that when you're purchasing your chair or when you purchase your desk, so you understand that they're going to work well together. If you prefer to sit deep under and close to to your desk, then you have to be mindful of that. Working while gaming or sitting with your forearms supported has been shown in the research to minimize or reduce stress on different parts of your body, whether it be in the shoulder and neck or the forearms. So studies identify that when the forearms are supported, muscles here have to work a lot less, and that's understood and expected because we don't have to hold the weight of our arm up against gravity if something is supporting it. And in the same way, we don't want to have our forearms float above the table or above our armrest, because that will lead to us using our forearms more. And in one study, it also showed that when our arms are supported, it puts us in less risk of being in the extreme ranges of motion and ulnar deviation. So that is why we want to make sure support your forearms. With cushion, it's pretty straightforward. What we typically recommend is something that minimizes the pressure on the bones of your butt or your butt bones. Proper cushioning, especially with relief at the ischium or your butt bones, has been shown to reduce lower back pain. So having a little donut where the bones of your butt are can help because it promotes trunk and pelvis muscle relaxation. It reduces the seat pressure and better overall blood circulation instead of having all of your weight be pressing up against these bones. So finally, we are now here at the chair fitting portion of the video, and our goal is to provide you with some practical strategies so that you can feel happy with the chair that you have decided to purchase. And it's going to help you leverage some of the information that you can find on the websites to properly fit it with your specific body type as well as your desk setup. So let's get into it. So step one is to look at the chair seat width measurement, but also measuring your own hip width to make sure that it doesn't exceed the chair width by more than 3 inches. That is the 1 HP general ergonomic rule. One thing we have to consider for the chair seat is the cushion, especially for chair seat width, because if you are on the heavier side, a firm seat might actually be better for you and provide you overall with more support because you have potentially more tissue underneath your butt. A softer surface can allow for sinking in and some more overall harmful biomechanical positions. And ultimately, it's a matter of preference. So we want to use this general 1 HP measurement to make sure that your width doesn't exceed the chair by too much. And what we use is a general rule of 3 inches. It might vary per person because, again, you don't want your butt or your hip to be too wide. When the chair is this wide in general, it'll feel like it's pushing you up on the sides and kind of compressing you. And so for the 1 HP measurement, what you want to do is stand up. You're going to grab a tape measure, start at your bony prominence on the side here for your greater trochanter, and pull it across in front of you to the other side and take that measurement. So it's bone to bone. And the reason why we use the front and not the back side, because everyone has different levels of tissue along their butt, and that can create a little more variation. And our goal is to identify what is the actual hip width so we can match that and make sure that we're in the clear with the chair that we choose. So here's an example of this. I am 18.5 inches with my hip width measurement. I sit in a Mavix chair and it is measured at 20 inches wide. So that falls within the appropriate range. So that's a good first step. Step 2 is finding the appropriate chair depth. And so what we like to utilize is a distance from your butt to the front of your knee to make sure that with the chair that you're choosing, it doesn't come into contact with the backside of your knee that can affect possibly some blood flow and maybe even cause some irritation with excessive pressure there. So in order to measure this, what you're going to be doing is sitting. You grab a tape measure, start at this bony prominence back here of your butt, and then you're going to bring it all the way to the front of your knee. You're going to take that number, subtract it by 6, and that gives you your range. If the chair seat depth falls within that range, then you are okay. But if it is outside of that range, then it might create a situation where it touches the backside of your knee and can sometimes or potentially cause some issues. So if we take the Mavix chair as an example, my measurement is 25 inches from back of my butt to the front of the knee, and a Mavix chair is 21 inches in depth as the longest depth distance, and a response vector is 23. So both of those work because my range is between 19 to 25. So step number 3 is confirming that it's going to fit with your desk. The standard height of a desk is 30 inches. You have to consider the thickness of the desk itself. If it's 1.5 inches thick or 1 inch thick, that means the floor to the bottom of the desk will be a different height. So that's the number that you want to take. So for example, if I have a 30-inch desk height and and the thickness is 1 inch, then floor to the bottom of the table is 29 inches. And so you want to look at your respective chair or the chair that you're interested in and see if you can adjust the chair so that the armrest can travel underneath if you prefer to sit with your knees underneath the table, or if you prefer to use the armrest to make sure that it actually can match or align with the height of the table at 30 inches. So there's a few things to consider there. And of course, this depends entirely on your own preference with where your arm likes to rest, whether it be on the desk or the armrest in itself. Do you like to be seated up in front so that your knees are underneath the table, or slightly further back? Those are things you have to consider, because if you want to have your knees underneath the desk, then the armrests have to clear the desk height. So what you need to do is you look up the adjustability to make sure that maybe at the lowest height of the armrest, is it clearing the standard height of a desk of 30 inches. And you also have to consider the depth of the desk, right? Because at the highest point of the desk, it's going to be 30 inches. But if it's 1.5 inches thick, then you're going to have to subtract that, meaning it's 28.5 inches from the floor to the bottom of the table, and making sure that your armrest is clearing that with its level of adjustability. And remember, it's not just the armrest height, it's the ability of your chair to lower to a certain point with the armrest adjusted. Step 4 is more of a bonus step. It assesses whether or not you need a footrest. And you can get pretty specific with this. So in steps 1 through 3, we've identified that the adjustability matches to fit the desk. So if you're clearing the desk with your armrest, then you know the expected height of the chair seat. And from there, you can calculate with the length of your leg, so from the knee down to the heel, if your feet will be touching the ground. So you can actually calculate that to see if there's any gap. And if there is a gap, you might be able to fill the need. I think in general, it's not necessary, but if you really want to get specific and make sure that you completely fit your chair, then this can be an additional thing that you can test out and tease out for yourself. Step 5 is another bonus step in that you're looking at backrest adjustability. Is the backrest adjustable to fit or conform to your lower back? From our butt all the way down to the peak arch of our lower back, you want to make sure that the backrest can either slide up, slide down, or it can change its actual shape to actually conform to your lower back to ideally look to minimize some stress. Although, as we mentioned in the previous sections, the backrest adjustability, as long as it's able to conform to your lower back, it can potentially help, although the research doesn't really say that there is a true benefit or not. All right, guys, that is all. I think this might be the most comprehensive gaming chair ergonomics video out on YouTube right now. And if you feel that it was very helpful for you, please do me a favor and share this. Don't forget to like, don't forget to comment with what you learned the most, and of course subscribe, because it always helps us so that we can better help the gaming community. If you have any questions at all, let us know down in the comments, but look out for some other great content coming soon. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you need individualized coaching for your injuries, sleep, exercise, or nutrition, you can check out our Patreon. And of course, you can catch us live on YouTube or Twitch. Play more, hurt less.